The cafe was bustling with the usual mix of customers. A few regulars reading their newspapers, a couple of friends chatting over coffee, and some office workers grabbing a quick bite before returning to their busy schedules. The waitress, as always, was busy making sure everything was running smoothly. She had worked here for years, and though it was a small, cozy place, she knew every corner, every customer, and every item on the menu like the back of her hand. She moved with purpose, balancing coffee cups and plates, her eyes constantly scanning the room, making sure no one needed anything. It was a typical Tuesday evening, nothing special. The cafe was quieter than usual, and the evening rush hadn't yet started. The waitresses and baristas were preparing for the evening crowd that would soon arrive, and there was a calm, almost peaceful energy in the air. The sound of the coffee machine steaming milk, the occasional clink of plates, and the murmur of quiet conversation filled the space. In the corner of the cafe stood an old piano. It wasn't the grandest piano, far from it. It had a few scratches on its surface, the wood a bit worn down from years of use, but to her it was a symbol of something more, a reminder of who she used to be. When she was younger, before life got in the way, she had spent hours at a piano much like that one. The music had been her escape, her way of making sense of everything. She never had formal lessons, and she wasn't particularly skilled, but she could play. She could lose herself in the music and forget about everything else for a while. But those days felt long behind her. Life had moved on, and her focus had shifted to paying the bills, keeping the cafe running smoothly and making sure everything was in order. The piano was just a distant memory, gathering dust in the corner. She hadn't played in years, not since she'd stopped finding time for herself. That was until today. The manager, a loud but friendly man who seemed to have an endless supply of energy, walked up to her as she was wiping down a table. "Hey," he said with a grin. "Can you do me a favor?" She raised an eyebrow, already feeling the weight of the long day ahead. "What's up?" "We've got a few extra people coming in tonight, and I thought we could use some live music. You know, to set the mood. How about you play a little something?" He smiled, his voice light and joking, but there was an unmistakable glint of hope in his eyes. Her heart skipped a beat. Her play? The idea of getting behind the piano again after all these years made her nervous. "I don't think that's a good idea," she replied quickly. "I mean, I'm no professional," he laughed. "Come on, you used to play, right? It'll be a hit. Just a little tune to keep the place lively." "You can do it." The suggestion made her uneasy. She hadn't played in so long, and the thought of playing in front of people made her stomach twist. But as she looked at him, his face filled with that familiar sense of excitement, she hesitated. What harm could it do? It wasn't like she was planning to do a full performance, just a quick light song. "All right," she said reluctantly, "but just for a little while." The manager clapped his hands together. "That's the spirit. Just something simple. You'll see, the crowd will love it." The piano felt foreign beneath her fingertips when she sat down. It had been years since she had touched the keys, and for a moment she just stared at them, unsure of where to start. The room was quieter now, and she could feel the eyes of the few customers who were still sitting nearby on her. She swallowed her nerves, closed her eyes for a moment, and began to play. The first few notes were shaky, unsure. She hadn't realized how much she had forgotten over the years. The melody sounded a bit off, but she pushed through. It wasn't the music she had once played in her youth, but it was a start. She tried not to think too much, letting her fingers fall naturally over the keys, searching for something familiar. At first, there were only a few glances from the nearby tables. People were still chatting, eating, not paying much attention to her. She played softly, her fingers moving over the keys without much thought. But then something shifted. The atmosphere in the cafe changed. The chatter began to fade. Slowly, the room quieted, as if the music had taken over. People began to listen. Her nervousness started to melt away. She hadn't expected anyone to notice, let alone be moved by her music. But there was something about the way the notes filled the room. The music was simple, nothing spectacular, but it was hers. It was a piece of her heart, something she hadn't shared with anyone in years. As the song continued, she felt herself getting lost in the rhythm. It wasn't about impressing anyone or performing. It was just about playing for herself. The familiar comfort of the piano surrounded her, and she found herself relaxing, her body swaying with the music. The crowd was still quiet, but now they were listening. Some were nodding along, others were watching, Their eyes focused on her. She could feel the weight of their attention, but for the first time in a long while it didn't feel like a burden. It felt right. When the song ended, she looked up, unsure of what to expect. For a brief moment, the room was silent. Then, as if on cue, the applause started. It wasn't loud at first, but it grew, filling the space around her. A few people stood up, clapping harder. She blinked, her heart racing. She wasn't prepared for this. It was just a song, a simple melody played on a whim. The manager rushed over, his face beaming. "See, I told you." "That was amazing." She stood up from the piano, her hands still trembling. "Thank you," she mumbled, unsure of what to say. It wasn't much, just a brief moment of music, but it felt different. It felt like something more. For the rest of the night, the cafe buzzed with excitement. People were talking about her performance, asking who she was and if she played professionally. The manager couldn't stop smiling, and for the first time, the cafe felt like a special place. Customers stayed longer, the energy was lighter, and everyone seemed to enjoy the atmosphere. She didn't expect the attention, but it was there, and it felt strange to her. As the night went on, she returned to her duties, but now something had changed. She found herself walking past the piano again, her fingers itching to play. The music still lingered in her mind. She wasn't a trained musician, and she wasn't about to quit her job to become a concert pianist, but in that moment, she realized something important. She had a gift. It had been buried under years of routine and responsibility, but it was there. And maybe, just maybe, it deserved to be shared. The rest of the evening passed by in a blur, and when her shift was finally over, she walked home, her thoughts racing. The music had stirred something deep inside her. It had reminded her of who she once was and who she could still be. She had always loved playing the piano, but life had gotten in the way. The bills, the long shifts, the constant pressure to keep things running. There hadn't been room for the things that made her feel alive. But that night, she had felt it. She had felt the music again. As she sat down in her apartment, she thought about the evening. The applause, the people who had listened, the manager's encouragement. All of it made her wonder if she was meant to do something more. She had spent so many years focused on the daily grind, never stopping to think about what she truly wanted. Music had always been a part of her, and tonight she had rediscovered it. She didn't know where it would lead or if it would even lead anywhere at all. But one thing was clear. The music was calling her, and for the first time in a long while she was listening. The days following her unexpected performance felt different. She had always considered herself just a waitress, a simple worker who did her best to keep things running smoothly in the cafe. But now the idea that she could be more, that she had something valuable to offer beyond her apron and her coffee tray, began to settle in her mind. The cafe was quieter the next few days. Without the rush of the evening crowd, there was more time for reflection. Each time she passed the piano, she couldn't help but glance at it. The keys seemed to call her, even though she wasn't sure she was ready to answer. She had played for a moment, just a fleeting taste of what it could feel like to be in control of the music again. But the idea of returning to it, of actually performing, even in front of a small group, felt like a mountain she wasn't sure she could climb. On her breaks, she would sit near the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys but never quite pressing them. Her mind was a mix of excitement and doubt. Could she really do it again? Was it even worth trying? The applause had been unexpected, yes, but that didn't mean she was good enough to play regularly, or to perform in front of strangers. Still, the thought lingered, like a small spark that refused to be put out. The memory of her brief performance, the way the music had filled the cafe and captured everyone's attention, stayed with her. It made her wonder, was it possible to turn this back into something real? Was it possible to chase this thing that had been buried so deep inside her? As the days went on, more customers began to mention her performance. Some of the regulars asked when she would play again. "You were amazing the other night," one customer said. "You should do that more often." Another asked, "Do you play anywhere else? You've got talent." She smiled and shrugged off the comments, but deep inside they made her heart race. She wasn't used to being noticed for something other than her work behind the counter. It was strange, even uncomfortable, but it was also thrilling. The manager, ever the optimist, didn't let the opportunity go to waste. He had been chatting with a few people in the cafe, and word had spread about her performance. "I think we should really consider this," he said one afternoon. Why not schedule a regular time for you to play? We could put up a sign, maybe even have a small event. It could be fun. Her first instinct was to decline. She wasn't ready. The thought of playing regularly made her anxious. She had no idea how to perform for people every week, but when she looked into the manager's eyes, she saw his genuine belief in her. It wasn't just a casual suggestion. He believed she had something special, something worth sharing. His encouragement made her feel conflicted. He wasn't asking her to be a professional. He wasn't asking her to give up everything and chase a career in music. He was simply asking her to share what she loved. After thinking it over for a couple of days, she agreed. "All right," she said quietly, unsure but determined. "I'll try it. Just once." The next week they set up a small performance night, an informal music hour that the cafe could advertise. It wasn't a big deal. Just a few people, maybe a dozen, but to her it felt like stepping onto a stage. She had never performed for a crowd like this, even if it was small. It was easy to play for herself, to lose herself in the music. But to play for an audience, people who would judge, people who were listening for something, was something entirely different. When the night came, she felt nervous, her stomach fluttering as she walked to the piano. She could hear the hum of conversation around her, the soft clinking of coffee cups, but it all seemed distant. She sat down at the piano, taking a deep breath. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, and she closed her eyes for a moment, willing herself to calm down. She had nothing to prove. All she needed to do was play. The first notes were shaky, but as she continued, her body relaxed into the music. She found a rhythm, something familiar. She was no longer thinking about what the people around her were doing or saying. She was just playing. It wasn't the grandest song, but it was enough. She played with ease, losing herself in the melody, letting her fingers speak for her. It felt like a conversation, like sharing a piece of herself with the room. As she played, she heard the soft hum of the crowd, the occasional murmur of approval. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was enough to keep her going. The simple notes she played seemed to have a magical effect on the cafe. People stopped talking. Their conversations quieted as they listened. The quiet in the room wrapped around her, almost like a blanket of comfort. For the first time since she'd started playing, she wasn't self-conscious. She wasn't worrying about being perfect, about getting every note right. She was simply playing. The crowd seemed to respect that, their eyes fixed on her, absorbed by the music. It wasn't about showing off. It was about sharing a part of herself, a part of who she was. When the song ended, the room remained still. She opened her eyes and glanced around, unsure of what to expect. Then slowly the applause began, soft at first, but then louder. The sound of clapping was accompanied by the murmur of approval, as a few people stood up, nodding in appreciation. She felt a flush of warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't a standing ovation, but it was more than she had expected. The music had touched them, and that was all that mattered. The manager beamed at her from the corner of the room. He had been watching the entire time. His face lit up with excitement. "See, you've got this," he said, giving her a thumbs up. That was amazing. She smiled back, her nerves still fluttering in her stomach. But there was something else now. A sense of relief, a sense of pride. She had done it. She had played in front of others, and it had been good. Better than she had expected. She wasn't perfect, but that didn't matter. She had shared something real, and that had been enough. After the performance, people came up to her complimenting her on the music. Some asked if she had any CDs or recordings. Others wanted to know when she would play again. "You've got a gift," one man said. "You should play here more often." She felt overwhelmed by the praise, unsure of how to respond. She had never thought of herself as someone with a gift. She was just a waitress, someone who had stumbled upon something she loved but never fully pursued. But now, for the first time, she saw it through the eyes of others. It wasn't just a hobby or a passing interest, it was something more. The following weeks were a whirlwind of emotions. The small music hour became a regular event, drawing more people each week. It wasn't a big crowd, but it was enough to make her feel like she was doing something important. With each performance, her confidence grew. She began to experiment with different songs, pushing herself to explore new melodies and styles. She played with the same freedom, the same joy, that she had felt when she first started playing. But even as she found herself getting more comfortable, a part of her remained unsure. She still didn't consider herself a true musician. and the idea of playing for a larger audience felt intimidating. The cafe performances were comfortable because she knew the space, knew the people. But what would it be like to perform elsewhere? To step out into the world beyond the cafe? The thought lingered, but for now she was content with the small steps she was taking. Every note she played, every small moment of connection with the crowd, reminded her that music had always been a part of her life. And now it was coming back. Maybe not in the way she had once imagined, but in a way that felt real, and that felt enough. As the weeks went by, she found herself becoming more and more immersed in the rhythm of her newfound musical routine. The cafe, once just a place where she worked to make ends meet, had slowly transformed into a stage, a place where she could express herself in ways she had never imagined before. It wasn't a grand stage, but it was hers, and that was enough for now. The music hour became a fixture at the cafe, and with each performance, her confidence grew. At first she had been nervous, unsure of her ability to play in front of others. But now she couldn't wait for the evening performances. They weren't just a way to pass the time. They were a release, a chance to reconnect with something deep inside her that had been neglected for so long. She still didn't consider herself a professional. She wasn't trying to become one. The idea of performing for large audiences, of stepping into the world beyond her small cafe, seemed impossible. But in the quiet moments after each performance, when the cafe was filled with the hum of satisfied customers and soft conversation, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had found something that made her feel alive, something that gave her joy outside of the hustle of her everyday life. The manager had been supportive from the start, and his belief in her was contagious. After each performance, he'd come over with a big grin, telling her how amazing she had been and encouraging her to keep going. "You've got it," he'd say. "I can see it in the way you play. Keep sharing your music." Even though his words made her smile, they also made her wonder, what if she could take this further? What if she could really pursue music not just as a hobby but as something bigger? It was a thought she pushed aside, too big and too frightening to entertain. She had a life, a routine. Music was her escape, her quiet space where she didn't have to worry about anything else. One evening, after a particularly good performance, the cafe was busier than usual. A group of people had gathered in one corner, talking and laughing. She was in the middle of packing up when she overheard someone mention her music. "Who is that?" one of them asked. "She's amazing. I've never heard anything like that in a small cafe before." She smiled to herself, but the words lingered in her mind. Amazing. She had never thought of herself that way. To her, she was just a woman playing because she loved it. But for the first time, she realized that maybe she wasn't just a waitress who played a few songs on the side. Maybe she had something more to offer. The thought was both exciting and terrifying. What did it mean to have something special? And what did it mean to share that with others? Could she really call herself a musician, even if she didn't have formal training or the experience to back it up? As the night continued, the crowd seemed to settle down, and she took a moment to breathe. She walked to the back of the cafe where the manager was chatting with a customer, and overheard something that made her pause. "I've been talking to some people," the manager was saying. "There's a venue not far from here that's looking for new talent. They're always looking for people who can add something fresh. I think she's got it." The word struck her like a bolt of lightning. A venue? Talent? She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Was he talking about her? She hadn't even considered the possibility of performing somewhere else, in a different space with new people. Beyond the familiar faces at the cafe, she wasn't ready for that kind of exposure. What if they didn't like her music? What if she wasn't good enough? The thought of stepping out into the unknown, of being judged, terrified her. She stood still, her mind racing. The manager saw her standing there and smiled. "You overheard that, didn't you?" he asked, his voice light. "I think it's time to take the next step. You've got something special, and it's time to share it with a bigger audience." Her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure she was ready for that. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the idea wasn't as scary as it had first seemed. Maybe it was time to take a chance, to step out of her comfort zone and see what happened. "Maybe," she said slowly. "Maybe I could give it a try." The manager's grin widened. "That's the spirit. Don't worry, it's a small venue. It's not like you'll be performing in front of a huge crowd. Just a few people who appreciate good music. The idea of playing at a real venue, a place where people went to listen to music and where there would be real musicians, felt overwhelming. She was just a waitress with a piano, not a trained artist, but something inside her pushed her forward, a quiet desire to see what she could do. She didn't know if she was ready for the big stage, but maybe a small one was a good place to start. A few days later, she agreed to the performance at the venue. The cafe's regular crowd had been encouraging, but this was different. This was real. She spent the next few days preparing, practicing more than she ever had before. She knew she wasn't going to be perfect, she didn't expect that. But she wanted to do her best, to show that she could be more than just a waitress who played on the side. The night of the performance, she stood in front of the venue, staring up at the sign. It wasn't a huge place, but it was a step up from the cafe. The lights were bright and the sound of chatter and music drifted through the doors. Inside, people milled about, sipping drinks and chatting. The venue had a warm, inviting vibe with soft lighting and an intimate stage. Her nerves were on edge as she walked backstage, her hands trembling. She wasn't sure she belonged here. She had only ever played in a small cafe, in front of people she knew. But now she was about to perform in front of strangers. What if they didn't like her music? What if she embarrassed herself? She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. The manager from the cafe had come with her to offer support, and he gave her an encouraging nod as she stepped onto the stage. The spotlight was bright, and for a moment she felt small, like she didn't belong. But then she saw the audience, the faces in the crowd, their eyes focused on her. She could feel their curiosity, their anticipation. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. She wasn't just a waitress. She wasn't just a woman who played the piano. She was a musician, and this was her chance to share her music. She sat down at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. The room grew quiet as she began to play, the familiar notes flowing from her hands. The song was simple, just like the ones she played at the cafe. But here it felt different. The crowd was listening, and she felt a connection with them through the music. It wasn't about perfection. It was about honesty, about sharing a part of herself. As the song ended, there was a brief silence. She held her breath, waiting. Then the applause began. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, but it was enough. It was the kind of applause that made her feel seen, that made her feel like she belonged here. When she finished the set, the crowd came up to her, offering compliments and asking about her music. The manager from the venue even came over, patting her on the back. "You did great," he said, his voice warm. "You've got something special." Her heart swelled with pride. She had done it. She had stepped out of her comfort zone and taken a chance, and it had paid off. It wasn't perfect, and she knew she still had a long way to go. But for the first time, she realized something important. She wasn't just a waitress who played piano anymore. She was a musician, and she was ready for whatever came next. The weeks that followed her first performance at the venue felt like a whirlwind. She had always been a creature of habit, settling into routines and finding comfort in the predictable. But now everything had changed. She had stepped into a world that was unfamiliar, yet strangely exhilarating. The cafe performances continued, but now they felt different. Each time she played, she felt a new energy, a sense of purpose that she hadn't known before. The more she performed, the more she realized how much she loved it. At first, it had been a way to escape the routine, a small joy she allowed herself on the side. But now it was becoming a part of her, something she couldn't ignore. Her confidence was growing, and with it the realization that maybe, just maybe, she could take this music thing further. But there were moments when doubt crept in. When she was alone, sitting in her apartment after a long shift, she would wonder if she was really cut out for this. Could she really be a musician? Was this just a passing phase? These questions plagued her mind, especially after each performance. While the audience at the cafe and the venue had been kind and encouraging, she still didn't consider herself a professional. She had no formal training, no connections in the music world. She was just a waitress who had stumbled upon something she loved, and that was the part that terrified her. One evening, after a particularly long shift, she was sitting in the cafe staring at the piano when the manager approached her. His usual upbeat demeanor seemed a little more serious tonight. "Hey," he said, sitting down beside her. "I've been thinking about your music." Her heart skipped a beat. "What about it?" "You've got something," he said, his voice steady. I've been talking to some people and they want to know more about you. Her eyes widened. What do you mean more about me? Look, I know you're not trying to make a career out of this, he said, leaning forward. But I think you should consider it. There's an opportunity for you to perform at a bigger venue, a place that's looking for fresh talent. It could be a chance to take things to the next level. The words hit her like a tidal wave. A bigger venue? Fresh talent? She wasn't sure she was ready for that. The thought of performing in front of more people, in a place where expectations were higher and the spotlight was brighter, filled her with both excitement and fear. She had never imagined that this would be more than a side hobby. It had always been her quiet escape, her personal way of reconnecting with herself. But now it was starting to feel like something more, something bigger. She swallowed hard, her nerves starting to show. I don't know. It's a lot. I've only played a few times. I'm not sure I can handle that. I get it, the manager said, his tone understanding. But you've got a gift and you deserve the chance to see where it can take you. This isn't about being perfect. It's about sharing something real. And people want to hear what you've got. She wasn't sure what to say. The idea of performing at a bigger venue scared her, but part of her was curious. Was this her chance to really find out what she could do? What if this was the break she needed? She could already feel the tug, the pull of something bigger, and it both thrilled and terrified her. I'll think about it, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The days following that conversation were filled with uncertainty. She spent her nights at the piano, her fingers lightly brushing the keys lost in the music. But even as the music soothed her, the questions remained. Was she ready? Was she good enough? And what would happen if she took this leap and failed? As she sat there, the weight of the decision hanging over her, she remembered something someone had told her a long time ago. The best way to succeed is to be brave enough to fail. It had always seemed like a cliché, something people said when they didn't have answers. But now it felt like a truth she couldn't ignore. Maybe the only way to know if she was truly ready was to try. She stood up, her hands shaking as she moved toward the phone. It was time to make the call. When she told the manager she was ready, she couldn't help but feel a mixture of excitement and fear. The next few days were a blur of preparation. She practiced more than she ever had before, spending hours at the piano perfecting her songs. She wasn't trying to be flawless, she just wanted to feel confident. She wanted to know that she had given it her all. On the night of the performance, she found herself standing backstage, her heart racing. The venue was bigger than she had imagined. The stage lit up with bright lights, the crowd a sea of faces. She could hear the murmur of conversation, the clinking of glasses. It was overwhelming. This was a far cry from the intimate performances at the cafe. Here, the expectations were different. The audience wasn't just there for background music. They were there to hear her, to see what she could do. The manager gave her a reassuring smile as he walked past her. You've got this, he said, his voice full of confidence. Just remember why you're here. You're not performing for them. You're performing for yourself. She nodded, her fingers gripping the side of the piano. His words helped calm her nerves, but the anxiety still gnawed at her. This wasn't just a simple performance. This was a step into a new world, one where she would have to prove herself. When it was time, she walked onto the stage, the spotlight blinding her for a moment. The audience was quiet, their eyes on her. She took a deep breath and sat at the piano, her hands resting on the keys. The silence in the room was deafening. For a brief moment, she felt like she might collapse under the weight of it all. But then she remembered the music. It had always been there, a constant companion that helped her find her way, and now it was time to let it guide her. She began to play, her fingers moving over the keys with a familiarity that calmed her nerves. The melody wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was a reflection of who she was, of everything she had been through to get here. As the music filled the space, she could feel herself connecting with the audience, each note carrying a piece of her heart. The room grew quiet, the only sound her music, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. She was no longer thinking about the people in the audience, the lights, or the expectations. She was lost in the music, in the joy of playing, and that was enough. When the song ended, the silence lingered for a moment before the applause began. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, warm. She opened her eyes and saw the faces in the crowd, their eyes soft with appreciation. She smiled, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. She had done it. She had stepped into the unknown and it had worked. The rest of the night passed in a blur. She played a few more songs, each one a little easier than the last. The nerves never completely disappeared, but they became manageable, something she could work through. As the final song came to an end, the applause grew louder and she felt a sense of pride swell in her chest. When she walked off the stage, the manager was waiting for her, his face glowing with pride. "See, I knew you had it in you," he said. That was amazing. She didn't know what to say. All she could do was smile, her heart still racing. She had done it. She had taken a chance and stepped into a world that felt both terrifying and exhilarating, and somehow she had come through on the other side. Later that night, as she sat in the cafe reflecting on everything that had happened, she realized something important. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a musician. And this was only the beginning. The days after her performance at the venue felt like a dream. She had never expected so much to change after one night. The applause still echoed in her mind, the warmth of the crowd's appreciation making her heart race each time she thought about it. But with each passing day, reality set in. She couldn't just walk away from this. She couldn't pretend that the music was only a passing hobby anymore. Something had shifted inside her and she knew she couldn't ignore it. The cafe performances continued, but they didn't feel the same. She wasn't just playing to fill the space anymore. She was playing to connect, to express something deeper than she had ever realized. It wasn't just about the notes anymore. It was about the feeling, the energy she created with each song, and with every performance she saw it in the eyes of the people who listened. They weren't just watching her play. They were feeling it too. One afternoon, as she was wiping down a table and getting ready for her shift, the manager came over. He was always enthusiastic, always ready with a new idea, but today he seemed more serious than usual. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, his voice calm but with an underlying excitement. She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sure, what's up?" "I've been thinking," he began, "about the success of your last performance. It wasn't just about the music. People were talking about it. I think there's a real opportunity here. What if we put together a real show? You know, not just a cafe performance, but something that's planned with a proper audience." Her heart skipped a beat. "A show?" she asked, the idea almost too big to grasp. "Like a real concert?" "Exactly," he said. "Think about it. You've got the talent. The people want to hear more. And I think if we organize it right, we could get a solid crowd." The words hung in the air and she felt the weight of them. A show. The idea of performing in front of a real audience, not just the small groups at the cafe, but a crowd that had come specifically to see her, was both thrilling and terrifying. She had never imagined anything like this. It felt too big, too far out of reach. "I don't know," she said slowly. "I'm still just learning, still figuring it out." "I get it," he replied. "But you're more ready than you think. You've been playing for a while now and the people love it. You're connecting with them in a way that's rare. This could be your chance to do something bigger." She stood still for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had always been someone who played it safe, who kept her dreams small, kept her expectations manageable. But now as she looked at the manager, something inside her began to shift. Maybe he was right. Maybe this was the moment to take that leap to see where this could go. "Okay," she said, the word feeling both freeing and terrifying. "Let's do it," the manager grinned. "Great, I'll start organizing. We'll need to find a venue, set a date, and promote it. It's going to be a lot of work, but I know you can do it." As he began making plans, she felt a mix of excitement and fear. This wasn't just a cafe gig anymore. This was a real performance with real expectations. It was a chance to share her music with more people, to see what it was like to stand on a stage where the spotlight was fully on her. But the pressure was also overwhelming. She wasn't a trained musician. She had no experience with big performances. What if she failed? What if no one showed up? The thought of it made her stomach twist, but there was no turning back now. The planning began in earnest. The manager worked tirelessly, booking the venue, reaching out to local musicians for support and spreading the word. They put up posters, created social media pages, and started promoting the show in every way they could think of. Every night after her shifts, she practiced. She played for hours, perfecting her songs, experimenting with new ones, pushing herself to be better. The pressure weighed on her, but it also motivated her. She had come this far. There was no way she was going to back down now. As the date of the show grew closer, the nerves began to intensify. She felt the weight of the event on her shoulders. The music was no longer just for herself. It wasn't just an escape anymore. It was a performance, a moment where she would have to prove herself. She would have to show the world, her small world at least, that she was more than just a waitress with a piano. She was a musician, and this was her chance to prove it. The night before the show, she couldn't sleep. Her mind was racing with doubts, with worries about everything that could go wrong. What if no one came? What if she froze on stage? What if she made a mistake and embarrassed herself? But as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the window the next morning, something clicked inside her. She had done the work. She had practiced. She had taken the time to prepare. And now it was time to trust herself. The music was hers. The show was hers. All she had to do was play. When the day finally arrived, she found herself backstage at the venue, her hands trembling as she held her sheet music. The room was full of people setting up, the buzz of excitement filling the air. The venue was packed, the seats full with people who had come to hear her play. She had never performed for a crowd like this before. The spotlight seemed brighter than she remembered, and the space felt larger, as though everything around her was magnified. The manager came over to give her a quick pep talk. "You've got this. Just remember, they're here to hear you. You're not performing for them, you're sharing your music. Let that guide you." She nodded, trying to calm the nerves that were swirling in her stomach. The crowd was waiting, and soon it would be her turn. As the opening act finished, she stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. She walked to the piano, the familiar feeling of the keys beneath her fingers bringing a sense of comfort. This was what she had always loved. Music was her language, her way of connecting with the world. As she began to play, the nerves melted away. The notes filled the space, and the world seemed to disappear. She was no longer worried about the crowd, about what people thought of her. She was lost in the music, just like she always had been. The first song flowed easily, and the second was even better. By the time she reached the end of her set, she felt like she was in a trance, the rhythm of the piano carrying her along. The applause that followed was loud and overwhelming. The crowd cheered, some standing to clap, others shouting out their appreciation. She smiled, her heart swelling with pride. She had done it. She had stepped out into the world, and they had heard her. She had shared her music, and it had connected with them. After the performance, people came up to her, shaking her hand and complimenting her on her songs. Some told her they couldn't wait to hear more, and others asked when her next show would be. She was overwhelmed by the kindness, by the way people had responded to her music. The manager came over, his face glowing with pride. "I knew you could do it," he said, giving her a hearty pat on the back. "You were amazing tonight." She couldn't stop smiling. "Thank you," she said, her voice full of gratitude. "Thank you for believing in me." That night, as she sat in her apartment reflecting on everything that had happened, she realized something. She had taken a chance. She had stepped out of her comfort zone and into something bigger than she had ever imagined. And she had succeeded. Music had always been a part of her, but now it was her career, her future. As she closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, she knew that this was just the beginning. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun.